My goal is to reach 3 people, to meet 3 new people, connect with 1 person.
Some backstory before we get into this episode. When I was younger, I didn't have a lot of friends, so I was grateful for the opportunity to go and do something with them when I got invited. It was like, oh wow, I got invited to do this thing, great. But then I realized that some of my friends had interests that were a little different than mine. Hey guys, anyone up for seeing the new movie on Queen Elizabeth? Looks pretty good.
Yo, I know what you did last spring. Vixen Sunrise. Playing. We doing this.
I soon realized I could either do what everyone else was doing, even if I wasn't so interested in that, or I could do the things that I was interested in, even if that meant being alone. I wasn't all that eager to become the expert on the I Know What You Did Last Spring kind of films, but then it's not like I wanted to do everything by myself either. Was there a happy medium that I could find?
This is my guy, Gatsby, Montana. Let's go on an adventure.
The plan was to start with a visit to the New Orleans Museum of Art, or NOMA for short. I'd been there once before, but then everything after that would be something new. I'd walk through the expanded sculpture garden that they recently opened, then do dinner nearby at Ralph's on the Park, come back to the museum to see a production from NOLA Project of Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. And then, depending on how the night went, I'd go and hear live music at Vaughn's. Lots of new things to check out and potential to connect with people. So that was the plan. At least the ducks outside of the museum were friendly enough, so that was encouraging. But the question remained, would others, specifically people, be friendly enough when they weren't hoping that I might have bread in my pocket to feed them? I did see a number of notable paintings and sculptures at the museum. Some of them were inspiring in that they gave me ideas for future projects, compositions, that sort of thing. I won't bore you with all of my notes on art history, but there are 3 paintings I wanted to mention. They kind of relate. The first is from El Greco, which some of you may know translates to the Greek in Spanish. The painter was actually born in Greece, so it's kind of fitting. The painter's birth name is actually Dominikos Theotokopoulos, which is a mouthful even for me, and I'm Greek, so let's stick with El Greco. Anyway, El Greco, born in Greece, painted in Spain. His work displayed in museums around the world, including New Orleans. How's that for multiculturalism, huh? The El Greco painting that I noticed at the museum was titled St. Francis, painted in 1570. It shows the Italian saint who founded the Franciscan order. And here in the painting, you see he's surrounded by darkness. There's the little skull, the memento mori on the bottom, and yet he's illuminated by a light that we don't see. His attention is towards the light. So it's a little stark, but it gets the idea across. The next painting I noticed was titled Othello and Desdemona, painted in 1829 by the French painter Alexandre Marie. This is part of the museum's exhibit on Orientalism, and it's quite dramatic. It's almost as if a snapshot was taken right after Othello kills his wife. And you have the swirling circular composition that reinforces that. I took note of it, though, because later that night, in the very same venue, I would be watching another play of Shakespeare's. It made me wonder what Shakespeare would have thought if someone had told him, hey, you know what? In a few hundred years, someone's going to paint a key moment from one of your plays. They're going to hang it in an art museum, something that hasn't been invented yet. And it's going to be on display in the same place where they're going to be performing another one of your plays later. As if that wasn't meta enough, the actor playing Pompey in Measure for Measure, the production I'd see later that night, went and gave us a tour of the museum while in character, riffing on the paintings. It's like, wow. The last painting I want to highlight here is from painter Edgar Degas. Painted in 1872, it's the portrait of Estelle Mousson Degas. Happens to be his blind sister-in-law. As some of you know, there's an Edgar Degas house in New Orleans that's one part museum, one part bed and breakfast, one part wedding venue. It's according to their site. Even though Degas only stayed in New Orleans 5 months. But then, when someone's successful, all kinds of entities, organizations pop up to preserve anything and everything that person touched, right? It's like,
over here we have the raggedy staircase that so-and-so climbed every day to get to a study. As you feel one of the planks slip beneath your weight, imagine how experiencing this every day might lead you to write the definitive philosophical treatise on existentialism.
If we don't have that kind of success, that's a little different. We'll wait a couple years, couple decades, and then tear everything down and build a new shopping center. But so it goes. To be fair, Degas did consider himself to be a son of Louisiana because his mother was born in New Orleans. So there's that. I've never been to the Degas house, but I am curious. Usually with those kind of places, you get at least 1 or 2 details about the person that helps put their work in context or gives you a new way to think about it. So I'm going to bump it up on my list of things to check out in New Orleans. Anyway, Degas, the painting here. I'm mentioning it here because of its technique. Even though it's a portrait of Estelle, she seems to be blending into the background. The plaque next to the painting confirms this impression. It tells us that Degas wanted to capture the fading way of life of Creoles like his half-sister. Notice that everything else in the painting seems to have more mass and vitality, even though it's a portrait of her. Degas gets his point across by putting Estelle so close to the flowers so you have maximum contrast. You have something that looks lifeless and then something colorful and alive. And then it's further emphasized by the sides of the painting. On the left side where Estelle is, it's brown, muted, gray, dark. On the right side, you have the window. You have a look into nature. It looks a little soothing and harmonious. And so when you look back at Estelle, she looks that much more sickly, as if she's dead already. All in all, it's a compelling way to get that idea across visually. Only after I picked those 3 paintings did I realize they all had something to do with death. And it wasn't the last time that death would make an appearance. After walking through the museum, I went to the newly expanded sculpture garden. I'd been to the old version, but this new one, almost twice the size. So lots to check out. There were some notable sculptures there, and one of the things that's compelling about that sculpture garden, not just the sculptures, but how they're arranged amidst the landscape. I was particularly captivated by the love sculpture. I've seen variations of that around different cities, but in this case, it's right near a giant, kind of unsettling, kind of menacing spider. Maybe it's just me, I'm not a big spider guy, but it's almost as if that spider is standing guard, maybe even sent by the Dark Lord, ready to attack anyone who gets too close to love. At least that was my take. I'm sure that's a perfectly normal take. That's not saying anything unusual about me. But it stuck out. I spent some time trying to capture it. And right nearby is the George Rodriguez blue dog, as if it's bearing witness to it all. Was I just trying to get the best shot that I could, or was I trying to delay the moment where I'd have to put myself out there and talk to strangers? Or was there something about the scene that related to the challenge at hand? Hard to say. There it is again, that reminder of death. After that, I went to Ralph's on the Park, and the place had a really warm, inviting feel to it. It seems like the kind of place that established New Orleanians go to connect with family and friends. The painting on the wall right near my table reinforced the idea that this was a place where people go to be social. Everyone there was with someone. They seemed to be having a good time together. Everyone except for me. I was alone once again. The contrast was stark, kind of like that Degas painting. The meal I had there was satisfying. It was well made, one of the better meals I've had in New Orleans, but it did nothing to subdue that contrast. So I made a note to myself, I was going to give it a concerted effort to talk to people back at the Museum of Art when I saw the play. I did meet a couple of people at the museum before Measure for Measure started. The first was a hefty guy who told me that he played football in college. I wasn't used to seeing a lot of hefty footballers coming to see Shakespearean plays, so I was curious to learn more about his story. I was hoping that he shared my interest in Shakespeare, but I soon discovered he was there for other reasons. The girl he was with soon came back to her chair. I heard and saw bits of their amorous encounter from my peripheral vision while the play was going on, so I can't say that I'm all that surprised to discover that he and his girl had left by the intermission. They had other plans for the evening. He left before I could get his name. So it goes sometimes, right? The next person I met was Tra Bechet. She's the CEO of Center for Restorative Approaches. I wasn't aware of the organization, but what she told me got me curious enough to look up the group afterwards. Their site says that they focus on building, strengthening, and repairing relationships, with a focus, it seems, on New Orleans schools. They give a number of statistics where they show that their projects help to cut down the number of referrals and suspensions in a dramatic way.
Now we're at 27 referrals. That's amazing. I've never seen that. I've been here for 23 years. We have never had 27 referrals by February of 2018.
Pretty neat to see. After we spoke a bit, I told her briefly about this and asked if I could take a photo, which she graciously allowed. As I waited for the play to begin, I noticed that the NOLA Project had described their production as well-fashioned for our modern American age. And they also had a poster about #MeToo before the show. So I thought, all right, here we go. I've sat through a couple of dramatic productions where they try to be allegories of our current political times, and those can be heavy-handed, dour, humorless, and so on. But this play was not that. It had a point of view, strong performances, and a sense of humor, such a rare combination. A big part of what made the play work for me was the performance of the Duke, played by Michael Bartel. In the play, Vincentio, the Duke of Vienna, has the weight of someone trying to root out corruption in his city. But the play also has some humor, so you want someone who is also able to convey a sense of whimsy at times, or at least being in on the joke, to set the tone for how we're supposed to interpret it. And I thought Michael did a nice job of balancing those two challenges, those two tensions. So I waited after the play had ended, trying to talk to him. The security guards were coming by and saying, like, all right, time to go. I stuck around, though. Eventually, he came out. We connected. He was nice enough to take a photo with me and even gave me an email to follow up. I had talked to 3 new people, and there was the potential that I might connect with at least one of them in ongoing ways. So in that regard, I had done what I was trying to accomplish. And I thought, well, I can go to Vaughn's, just relax, listen to some music, and it would be like lagniappe, which a phrase they use here in Louisiana. For those of you not in the area, it means a little something extra. That ended up being a fateful decision that would change the whole tone and focus of this video. It was my first time to Vaughn's, and when I first walked in, I was captivated by the energy, the color of the place. Corey Henry and the Treme Funktet were playing, and people were out and about having a good time. But there was also quite a bit of dancing going on, which I didn't realize. I thought it was just a music venue where we'd be able to hang out and listen to music. And there were people doing that, but there was dancing as well. And that was a little unsettling for me. I have complicated associations with dancing. I might tell you about that more in a bit. But anyway, it was a lot to take in, so I went outside to regroup. And that's when I saw her. She was looking my way, it seems. Even looked my way and smiled. I was there off in a bench on the side, and I looked around casually, just looking behind me. Well, I was right against the wall. It seemed like she was looking my way. I casually looked back at her, and it seemed like she was still smiling. It seemed like she was still looking in my direction. In the back of my mind, I was thinking this could be a nice cap to the video. And not just that, not just for the video, but this could be a captivating person to get to know. And I wanted to connect. But I couldn't. I locked up. I was feeling defensive because it was a loud environment. There was dancing going on. I've never really been a great dancer. And it's not just that. Dancing has certain associations for me. When I was in high school, I never went to prom. I wanted to go, but I was still trying to get better at connecting. In elementary school, I had been teased a bit. And so middle school and beyond was just trying to fit in, trying to do whatever. But just trying not to get picked on. That was the primary thing. So dancing in that regard was a reminder of me being on the outside. Even afterwards, I'd gone to dances later in college and whatnot, but still as an outsider. Dances were not the place where I would thrive socially. Other places, I've gotten a little better at connecting. If it's a bar, a bookstore, church, hang out with friends, barbecue, outdoor. Some of those areas I'm a little better at connecting with people. Dances, not so much. It's usually been a time where I felt awkward, where I felt out of place, aware of my inability to dance. I even took a dance class once, and I was the guy, kind of clumsy, who you'd see the other girls are like, oh, why him today? Why? There's even this anxiety that I have that someday I'll meet the perfect girl, and we'll get to know each other, we'll go on dates, and then we'll be engaged, and then we'll practice for the wedding, and in some freakish way, I'll knock everything over attempting to dance, causing a lot of damage, and then the whole thing will be called off. A handful of times, and they really are a handful that I can count on probably one hand, where I did have a good time dancing was when I was with people, friends, a girl I already knew. So then it helps. It's like, all right, at least we have this. We know each other. You hang out with me, so maybe you can forgive these terrible dance moves. But not something I've been great at, just meeting people on the dance floor or where dance is nearby. And so I was too guarded to really go up and say hello. It was like there's dancing nearby, and if I say hello, are we going to end up dancing? Also, I was trying not to drink. I wasn't drinking that day or for a couple of days, but I felt that pressure, like maybe it would be better if I had a drink. Like, no, not going to drink, but maybe I would feel better, but I don't want to, but maybe it would help. So there was that tension. It translated into me being guarded, unresponsive when she seemed to be looking in my direction. She seemed to be smiling at me. So after moments passed, I realized, well, I need to do something about this. I'm going to try and say hello. I looked for her and she was gone. She had been there just about 10 minutes or less. So quite possibly my interaction made her leave. I was outside. I saw her when she came in, and I looked around for her. I couldn't find her. So that was disheartening. I had tried to connect. I'd gone on this whole trip trying to connect. And not only did I feel dissonant at the end of the night, possibly I made someone else so discouraged that she left shortly after coming to the place. The band was still playing, still early on in the night. Who knows what was going on? I don't know. I didn't talk to her. It might have been something completely different. But that was so disheartening to me. And I couldn't even articulate all these things. I can explain now a little bit why I was so guarded. Like, well, it's those associations I've had in the past. It's a tense situation. I don't know. I don't want it to be exactly like it was in the past. But then it's just sort of like, no, just something's a little off. There's dancing. I need to get some distance. I need to retreat and then go back and get ready. And it fell apart in a big way. Now, this may not seem like a big deal, but man, it was so demoralizing. Driving back home from New Orleans, after that happened, after I saw that she left, it's like, all right, you know what? This is it. I'm just going home. I'm just wasting my time here. And that drive back from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, mostly dark, not a lot of lights, just driving through darkness. It feels like I'm surrounded by the darkness. It's overwhelming me. And it felt like the equivalent of being punched in the stomach. It had that emotional, visceral feel that it just weighed on me. It's like, this is never going to change for me. It's always going to be like this. I'm always going to feel dissonant, not quite right. The other interactions that I had earlier faded from memory. All I could remember was the interaction that didn't work. And it did feel a little bit like I was dying. Like that possibility of connection was fading like it had faded so many times before. And that this was it. This is how my life was going to be. It's a little overdramatic, I know. I'm not saying that's the right way to look at it. I'm saying that's how it felt at the time. For a few days after that, I did what I could to retreat from the world, to stay in my room, to not go out and about beyond whatever I needed to do. I had tried to connect. I had tried to go and put myself out of my comfort zone, and it had resulted in a dissonant, disheartening experience. As if that weren't dissonant enough, my car, Gatsby, Montana, that you saw earlier, this was the first and only video he is going to be in, because a few weeks later, he met a tragic demise. There was an accident I got into. It ended up being that it was too expensive to repair. It was more economical to buy another used car instead. But then, I guess that's what I get for partially naming my car after The Great Gatsby. It was meant to be a nod to the green in that book. I should have probably thought about it, right? Because in that book, there is a car crash that ends in death. So in retrospect, probably not the best idea to name my car after that, but what can I say? The book has certain significance for me. So it goes, right? I mentioned in part one that this kind of thing was a challenge for me to share. In part one, there were some awkward moments. In this one, though, it was outright failure. I had tried to connect. Instead of connecting, I felt dissonant, and possibly someone else did as well. But then, I suppose this kind of thing is going to happen. The reason that I have issues connecting, the reason it's a challenge is not just because I don't know what to say. Like, if I could only think of that clever one line, hey, baby, come here often, right? There are underlying issues for me, and also it seems for others who struggle with similar things. So doing a video series like this means that at some point, these kinds of things are going to come up. So I guess it's not bad that it came up early on. And in retrospect, there were some moments I appreciated, even about this video. I did get to go and see new things. I did get some inspiration from the artwork I experienced. And there were even two potential connections with Tra and Michael. Both I'm going to try to follow up with and see if we can get to know each other better. And then with the instance at Vaughn's, it brought me face to face with that underlying residual issue. It's something that I wasn't able to articulate as well before because it's something I experience and I don't always think about how to convey it or what exactly is going on. Why am I reacting? There are probably dozens, if not hundreds of things going through my mind. Like, oh, this feels kind of like this. This is kind of like that. I want to be guarded because I remember kind of like this when it hurt before. So I'm at least acknowledging those things. The hope is that eventually that'll lead to progress. But in the meantime, I've got to address these things. Because, as I've said before in part 1, this is a need. I need to get better at this. Would some of the things that have happened that hurt quite a bit have happened if I had been a little better at connecting with people, if I had been better at acknowledging the hurts, the past aches that I bring into the table when I try to interact? Maybe not. So I do have some takeaways. I think honesty is important. Acknowledging sometimes things hurt. And it's better to go with that, acknowledge that to ourselves and then to others, than to try to pretend otherwise and just go like, hey, you're looking great to see you. I'm excited to be here, right? That comes across as not quite straightforward, like we can feel it. So that's something that I need to work at. There's also something known as attribution bias comes into effect here, where we consider our own motives based on circumstances, right? Like, oh, I acted this way because I had a bad day, or, well, because I am nervous about dancing and was trying not to drink, I was reacting a little bit more guarded than I might normally be. For others, though, we assume character issues. Like, oh, the person treated me like this because he or she's a horrible person. This is an unfriendly, horrible, evil person, thoughtless, careless, evil, whatever. There might be evil people out there. There might be people who do bad things. But sometimes it's just a matter of people facing other things that they're going through, right? Like if you didn't know me, if you didn't hear this, would you know that I had those underlying reservations, those hurts from the past that influence how I am, even in the proximity of dancing? Maybe not. I interact with people. I even have a podcast where I do interviews with people. I work on various projects as a filmmaker of sorts. So I'm sometimes instructing others in social settings. Would you know that I have these kind of struggles if you didn't see this? No, perhaps not. You might make assumptions like, oh, he's just abrupt, he's just being distant, he doesn't care about me. Not necessarily true. It might just be that I have my own challenges, things I'm struggling with, and maybe you do too. So it's helpful to keep that in mind. Like, who knows what the other person is going through or how he or she is feeling in that situation. It helps to just take a moment, say hello, and do something to break the ice of those assumptions. The icebreaker is a handy metaphor because we all have those kind of mental blocks we put up. Oh, this person, he gave me a look, he was just angry, he doesn't care. It might just be he or she had a long day, is tired and got 3 hours of sleep. We don't know until we take the effort, take the initiative, and try to break that ice. In honor of my car, Gatsby, Montana, I'd like to share with you a quote from the great Gatsby. I felt a haunting loneliness sometimes, and felt it in others. Young clerks in the dusk, wasting the most poignant moments of night and life. Fare thee well, Gatsby, Montana. May we meet again someday in that highway in the sky. To those of you who made it this far, thank you for watching. I know we've covered all kinds of territory here, and the tones varied a little bit, but this was the only way that I could share some of the things that I shared at the end. To be honest, I don't think it's all that different from the way connection works. We don't usually get right to it. We meander a bit. We share our interests, maybe a joke or two, to see if we like the other person, trust the other person enough to share our deeper truths. To get some sense of how challenging this is for me to share, there's this. It's grown a bit since I first started recording directly to camera for this episode. The thing is, it felt uncomfortable, and it was taking me a while to put to words the way I felt about what happened and how it related. So I put it off. I said, well, I'll get to it tomorrow. And then that became tomorrow and the next day. And it's been a few days since then when I'm recording this now. Dissonance in some form or another is probably going to show up in the challenges we face. It doesn't just go away. We can choose to let it overcome us, or we can try to plow through it, which is what I'm trying to do here. And from what I've heard, from what I've seen from others, it seems like when you do that enough, that's when hope takes root. That's when progress is made. Speaking of which, I'm hoping that the next episode will be a little bit more optimistic. We'll have a little bit more of a hopeful note in it. I've recorded some of it, not all of it, so who knows what will happen between now and then. But that's the hope. As I mentioned in part 1, I'm committed to doing at least 5 episodes, regardless of how uncomfortable they make me feel. Beyond that, I don't know. So if this is the kind of thing you appreciate, let me know. That might influence what happens next. All right, enough from me. If I can do it, you can too. Get out there and go connect with someone, all right? By the way, eventually I did get another car. I'm calling him the Silver Phoenix. So there's that.
Don't say, darling, 'cause you'll fake it. Don't hide the tears, 'cause I know you're breaking. All this love